The Vraxel warships hung in space like dark metal sharks circling their prey. 500 of them surrounded the blue and green planet below, their weapons charged and ready to fire. Inside the largest ship, the Vraxel commander stared at the world with cold eyes. This would be easy, just like all the others. On the planet's surface, the Calath people gathered in their crystal towers, watching the sky with fear. They were a peaceful species who had never wanted war. Their bodies shimmered with soft light as they moved through their cities, trying to comfort their children and prepare for the end. The Calath had tried to run, tried to hide, but the Vraxel had found them anyway. The Vraxel always found everyone in the capital city. The High Council met in emergency session. The eldest among them, a Calath whose light pulsed with ancient wisdom, spoke in patterns of color that meant despair. They had seen what happened to other worlds that resisted the Vraxel. Complete destruction. No mercy. No survivors died, but one young council member named Vareth remembered something. Deep in the archives, there were stories of an ancient device found in ruins on their smallest moon. A gateway, the old text said. A door to other realities. Most Calath thought it was just legend, but Vareth had studied the artifact for years. If there was any chance, any hope at all, it was worth trying. The council argued for hours while the Vraxel fleet tightened its formation above them. Finally, with time running out, they agreed. Vareth would activate the gateway. They would call for help from across the dimensions, not knowing who or what might answer. Halfway across the galaxy, on a planet called Earth, Captain G1 sat in her office reviewing tactical reports. She was young for her rank, only 32, but she had earned her position through brilliant strategic thinking. Her black hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her dark eyes scanned the data on her screen with focus. The military research facility where she worked was located on the coast of South Korea. Outside her window, she could see the ocean and the mountains in the distance. It was a beautiful spring day. She had no idea it would be her last day on Earth for a very long time. Down in the engineering bay, Minho checked his equipment one more time. He was a special forces captain, built strong from years of training, with scars that told stories he rarely shared. Today was supposed to be a simple drill, testing new combat gear with his team. He loaded his rifle and joked with his squad mates, their laughter echoing in the concrete room in the physics laboratory 3 floors below. Dr. Yuna adjusted her glasses and peered at the quantum readings on her monitor. Something strange was happening with the dimensional sensors, but she couldn't figure out what. The numbers didn't make sense. Energy was building from nowhere, coming from nothing. She called her assistant over to double-check the instruments at that exact moment. Half a galaxy away, Vareth activated the ancient gateway on the Calath moon. The device hummed to life after sleeping for thousands of years. Blue light exploded outward, searching through dimensions, looking for help, calling for heroes. The gateway found Earth. G1 felt it first as a vibration in her bones. Then her office started to glow with blue light that came from everywhere and nowhere. She jumped to her feet, reaching for her sidearm, but the light was already surrounding her. She tried to shout, but no sound came out. Minho and his team saw the light fill the engineering bay like water flooding a room. They raised their weapons, training taking over, but there was nothing to shoot. The light wrapped around them gently, almost tenderly, and the world began to dissolve. Yuna watched her instruments go crazy with readings that should have been impossible. Then she saw her own hand starting to fade, becoming transparent. She understood in that moment what was happening, even though it defied everything she knew about physics. They were being moved through space itself. The blue light spread through the entire facility. Soldiers, scientists, engineers, cooks, medics, administrators, everyone inside the compound was caught in its embrace. Ships docked at the naval port nearby, were lifted into the light. Equipment, weapons, supplies, everything was being pulled into the gateway's reach. 50,000 people felt the world twist and change around them. They felt themselves stretched across impossible distances, pulled through spaces that human minds were never meant to understand. Some screamed. Some prayed. Some simply held on to whoever was nearest to them and waited for it to end. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Ji-Wan opened her eyes and saw an alien sky. 2 suns burned overhead, one orange and one yellow, painting everything in strange colors. She was standing on smooth ground that felt like glass under her boots. Around her, thousands of her people were appearing, stumbling, confused, terrified. Minho materialized with his weapon ready, his team forming up around him by pure instinct. They were on some kind of landing pad made of crystal, and in the distance stood towers that seemed to grow from the ground like frozen music. Yuna appeared near a group of frightened technicians, her scientific mind already trying to process what had happened. Dimensional transport. Actual, real dimensional transport. It should have killed them all, torn them apart at the atomic level. But somehow they were alive and whole. Above them, the Caliph people watched in amazement as thousands of strange beings appeared on their world. These creatures stood upright on 2 legs, had hair in various colors, and wore uniforms of green and black. They carried weapons and machines the Caliph didn't recognize. And far above, in the cold of space, the Vraxel commander saw the energy signature of the gateway activation. He sneered with contempt. The desperate prey had called for help. It didn't matter. Whatever had answered would die with them. The first few hours were chaos. Soldiers shouted orders trying to establish a perimeter around something they didn't understand. Scientists ran diagnostic tests on equipment that shouldn't have survived the journey. Medics treated people for shock and panic attacks. Everyone wanted answers that nobody had. General Deho emerged from the confusion like a rock in a storm. He was 58 years old, with gray hair and a voice that could cut through any noise. Within minutes, he had the senior officers gathered and was organizing the crowd into some kind of order. Soldiers to the outer ring, civilians to the center, weapons ready but pointed down. Whatever had brought them here might still be a threat. That's when the Caliph approached. 3 of them walked forward slowly, their crystal bodies pulsing with gentle light. They held no weapons. Their hands, if you could call them hands, were spread wide in a gesture that seemed universal for peace. One of them, Verth, stepped ahead of the others and began to glow in patterns of blue and gold. Lieutenant Hana, the intelligence officer, stood next to Ji-Wan and whispered urgently. She had studied xenolinguistics as part of her training, though she never thought she'd actually use it. She watched the light patterns carefully, trying to find meaning in them. Color combinations, rhythm, sequence. It was language. She was sure of it. Yuna came running up with a tablet in her hands. Her team had been scanning the electromagnetic spectrum and found something amazing. The light patterns the aliens were producing had structure, mathematics, repeating sequences. It was communication. She could build a translator if she had time. G1 made a decision. She stepped forward, alone and unarmed, her hands spread wide like the Caliph. Behind her, Minho tensed, ready to pull her back if needed. But Ji-Wan kept walking until she stood face to face with Verth. The alien was taller than her by a full meter, its body like living crystal that caught the light of the twin suns. She pointed to herself. Ji-Wan, she said clearly. Then she pointed to the alien and raised her eyebrows in question. Verth understood. Light pulsed from its body in a pattern that somehow felt like a name. Then it did something remarkable. It reached out very slowly and touched Ji-Wan's forehead with one crystalline finger. Images flooded into Ji-Wan's mind. Not words, but pure information. She saw the Vraxel ships surrounding the planet. She saw other worlds burning under their attack. She saw the Caliph people dying, their light going dark forever. She understood in an instant what had happened and why they had been brought here. The Caliph were desperate. They were calling for help. They were about to be destroyed. When Verith pulled its finger back, G1 stumbled. Minho caught her arm, steadying her. Her eyes were wide, and her face had gone pale. She turned to General Deho and told him everything she had seen. The general's expression hardened. He called an immediate council of all senior personnel. Within the hour, they gathered in a hastily erected command tent. G1, Minho, Yuna, Hannah, and 24 other officers crowded inside while Vareth and 2 other Caliphs stood nearby, their light dim with worry. Yuna had worked fast. She held up a device that could translate Caliph light patterns into Korean and vice versa. It wasn't perfect, but it worked well enough. Through the translator, Vareth explained everything in detail. The Vraxel Empire had conquered 3,000 star systems over 200 years. They were unstoppable. Their ships had shields that regenerated faster than weapons could damage them. Their plasma cannons could crack planets. Their armies had never lost a major battle. Every species that fought them died. Every species that surrendered became slaves. The Caliph had tried to hide in the outer reaches of the galaxy, but the Vraxel found them. Now, 500 warships orbited overhead. The Vraxel commander had given them 72 hours to surrender. That was 2 days ago. They had 24 hours left. The tent fell silent as the humans processed its information. They were 50,000 soldiers and scientists transported across the galaxy, facing an enemy that had conquered thousands of worlds. They had a few ships, limited ammunition, and no way home. The gateway that brought them here needed 6 months to recharge before it could send them back. Engineer Sungmin, a naval specialist with oil-stained hands and a practical mind, asked the obvious question. Could they even hurt the Vraxel? Did human weapons work against their technology? Nobody knew. They had never fought aliens before. They had never even met aliens before today. General Deho stood and walked to the center of the tent. His eyes moved from face to face, reading the fear and uncertainty he saw there. Then he spoke in a voice that carried absolute conviction. They had a choice, he said. They could hide and hope the Vraxel ignored them. They could try to bargain for their lives. Or they could fight. Minho spoke up from the back. He had already made up his mind. The Caliph had saved them from the transport, kept them alive through impossible physics. These crystal people were innocent victims facing genocide. He was a soldier. Protecting the innocent was what he had sworn to do. Whether they were human or alien. Hana added that running wasn't an option anyway. If the Vraxel destroyed this world, the humans would die too. They had no ships capable of leaving the system. This was their home now, at least for the next 6 months. If the Vraxel won, everyone died. Yuna surprised them all by agreeing with Minho. She was a scientist, not a soldier, but she had seen the images Verith shared. She had seen children being killed. Sometimes, she said quietly, knowledge wasn't enough. Sometimes you had to stand up. One by one, the officers voiced their support. They would fight. They would find a way. G1 spread a map across the table, a tactical display showing the planet and the Vraxel fleet positions. She studied it with fierce concentration, her mind already working through possibilities. The Vraxel had never faced humans before. They didn't know how humans thought, how they fought, what they were capable of. That was an advantage. Minho asked for permission to take a scout team up to spy on the Vraxel. He needed to see their ships, their weapons, their defenses with his own eyes. General Deho approved immediately. The meeting went late into the night under the alien stars. Plans were made. Resources were counted. Yuna promised to adapt human technology to fight Vraxel shields. Sungmin said he could retrofit the callous civilian ships with human weapons. Hana would coordinate intelligence-gathering dot as dawn broke, with two suns rising together. The humans in Calith prepared for war. They were outnumbered. They were outgunned. They were fighting an enemy that had never lost. But the Vraxel had never fought humans before. They didn't know that humans specialized in winning impossible fights. Minho's boots touched down on the Vraxel outpost just before midnight. His team of 12 moved like ghosts through the dark corridors, their new stealth suits bending light around them. The technology was experimental back on Earth, but here it was their lifeline. They had studied the outpost's layout from orbit, memorized every turn, every door, every guard rotation. The Vraxel weren't expecting infiltrators. Why would they? No species had ever dared to attack them first. Their security was lazy, confident, arrogant. Minho's team slipped past 3 guard posts without being seen. They planted listening devices, copied computer files, and recorded everything they could about Vraxel. Weapons and shields. What they discovered changed everything. Back at the human base, Ji-won listened to Minho's report with growing excitement. The Vraxel shields operated on a rotating frequency system, cycling through 12 different patterns every minute. It was predictable. More importantly, there was a half-second gap during each transition, where the shields dropped to 30% strength. It was a design flaw, a tiny weakness in armor that seemed invincible. Hana added more intelligence from intercepted communications. The Vraxel command structure was completely rigid. Every ship reported to the flagship. Every decision came from the commander. If you cut off the head, the whole body would freeze in confusion. They had no backup protocols, no chain of command for emergencies. It had never been necessary before. Yuna worked without sleep 40 hours straight. Her team built devices that could detect the shield frequency transitions and mark the vulnerable moments. They were crude, built from spare parts and desperation, but they worked. She also modified every EMP weapon they had, tuning them to disrupt Vraxel systems. The countdown continued. 18 hours until the Vraxel ultimatum expired. 12 hours. 6. General Daeho called everyone together for final orders. The plan was insane, held together by hope and innovation. It had to work because there was no second chance. When the timer reached 0, the Vraxel fleet moved into attack formation. 500 warships descended toward the planet in perfect geometric patterns, their weapons charging with energy that made space itself shimmer. On the flagship, the Vraxel commander sneered with satisfaction. The pathetic creatures below had ignored his mercy. Now they would learn the price of defiance. Then the humans struck first. Pilot Yemen led the first wave. 30 fighter craft screaming up from the planet's surface at speeds that made the air burn. The Vraxel targeting systems locked onto them easily. This would be over in seconds. But the human fighters didn't fly in formation. They didn't follow any pattern the Vraxel computers recognized. They twisted and spun and rolled in ways that seemed random, chaotic, impossible to predict. Vraxel plasma bolts filled the sky but hit nothing. The fighters were already somewhere else, moving on instinct and reflexes instead of programmed tactics. Yemen laughed as he rolled his craft upside down and fired missiles at a Vraxel destroyer. The shields blocked them easily, but that wasn't the point. He was making them react, making them focus on him. That's when the second wave hit. Sungmin had spent days retrofitting every Calith civilian transport and cargo ship with human weapons. They weren't warships. They were mining vessels and passenger cruisers, held together with improvised armor and prayer. But there were hundreds of them, and they came from every direction at once, appearing from behind the planet's moons and asteroid fields. The Vraxel fleet tried to reorganize, to establish firing solutions on targets coming from all vectors. Their computers struggled to prioritize threats. Which ships were dangerous? Which were decoys? They couldn't tell. Specialist Taiwan sat in a bunker on the planet's surface, his fingers dancing across keyboards as he launched the cyber attic. Human computer viruses poured into the Vraxel network through the gaps Minho's team had found. The viruses were simple but effective, feeding false sensor data to Vraxel ships, making them see enemies where there were none. 3 Vraxel cruisers opened fire on their own destroyer, thinking it was a human vessel. The destroyer's shields held, but the confusion spread. Command channels filled with conflicting orders. Ships broke formation trying to respond to phantom threats. On the ground, Sergeant Yunji commanded 5,000 soldiers dug into defensive positions around the capital city. The Vraxel would send drop troops eventually. She was ready. Her people had spent days preparing traps, improvised explosives, and ambush points. The Caliph had helped, using their knowledge of the terrain to create a maze of death for any ground assault. The space battle intensified. Yemen's squadron used the chaos to get close to a Vraxel battleship. Their fighters so small and fast that point defense systems couldn't track them. They coordinated their attack perfectly, all firing at the exact half-second when Yuna's sensors detected the shield transition. Missiles and railgun rounds punched through the weakened shields and tore into the battleship's hull. It didn't explode, but it listed to one side, venting atmosphere and debris. First blood. First Vraxel casualty in the war. The Vraxel commander roared in fury. Impossible. These primitives with their crude ships and chaotic tactics were actually hurting his fleet. He ordered a full assault, every ship firing at once. The sky lit up with enough energy to boil oceans. But the human and Caliph ships were no longer where the Vraxel expected. They scattered like schools of fish, regrouped in new formations, attacked from unexpected angles. For every transport the Vraxel destroyed, 2 more appeared from hiding spots and took their place. Minho watched from a stealth ship positioned near the Vraxel flagship. This was his mission, the most dangerous part of the plan. He had 20 Special Forces soldiers with him, the best fighters humanity had to offer. They wore powered armor that Yuna's team had enhanced with Caliph crystal technology. They carried weapons designed to work in the zero gravity of ship corridors. He gave the order. The stealth ship launched them like missiles toward the flagship, their approach masked by the battle raging around them. They hit the Vraxel hull and cut through with plasma torches, forcing entry into an auxiliary airlock inside the flagship. Alarms blared as the Vraxel finally detected the boarders. Security teams rushed toward the breach point. They expected to overwhelm the invaders with superior numbers and firepower. They had never fought humans in close quarters combat before. Minho moved through the corridors like death itself. The Vraxel were taller and stronger, but they were slow, methodical, predictable. They had never needed to be good at hand-to-hand fighting. Their shields and weapons always kept enemies at distance. But in these tight spaces, with humans moving faster than their reflexes could follow, their advantages meant nothing. His team cut through them efficiently, brutally, taking the Vraxel completely by surprise. They fought their way deeper into the ship, following the layout Minho had memorized during the infiltration. 30 Vraxel died in the first 5 minutes. 50 more in the next 10. The Vraxel commander received reports of boarders on his ship with disbelief. How? How were these primitives on his flagship? He redirected more security teams, pulling them from other duties. That's exactly what Minho wanted. Every Vraxel guarding the corridors was one less at the command center. Outside the ship, the battle raged on. The Vraxel were taking losses, real losses, for the first time in their history. Ships were damaged. Crews were dying. The Invincible Empire was bleeding. And deep inside the flagship, Minho reached the blast door protecting the command center. He placed charges on the hinges, signaled his team to take cover, and smiled grimly. The Vraxel thought they were invincible. They were about to learn different. The blast door exploded inward with a sound like thunder. Minho went through the smoke first, his rifle already firing. The Vraxel command center was massive, filled with holographic displays and control stations. The commander himself stood at the center, his forearms reaching for a weapon he would never draw. Minho's team moved with practiced precision. 3 targets down in 2 seconds. 5 more in the next breath. The Vraxel commander died still trying to issue orders, still unable to believe these small creatures had reached him. His body hit the floor and the command center fell silent except for the sound of human breathing. Outside the flagship, the Vraxel fleet faltered. Ships stopped receiving orders. Captains called for instructions that never came. The rigid hierarchy that had served them for 2 centuries became their fatal weakness. Without the commander, without clear direction, they didn't know what to do. Jae-min saw it happen in real time. Vraxel ships breaking formation, some trying to regroup, others continuing their last orders on autopilot. It was beautiful chaos. He called to his squadron and they pressed the attack, targeting the largest ships while they were confused and disorganized. On the ground, Yoonji heard the news over the radio and allowed herself one moment of hope before focusing back on her task. Vraxel dropships were entering the atmosphere, carrying ground troops to the surface. Her soldiers waited in their hidden positions, fingers on triggers, hearts pounding. The dropships landed in what they thought was a clear landing zone outside the capital. The Vraxel poured out in formation, their armor gleaming, their weapons ready. They expected organized resistance, fortified positions they could overwhelm with superior firepower. Instead, they got hell. Explosives detonated under their feet. Sniper fire came from buildings they thought were empty. Calith crystals buried in the ground released focused bursts of energy, cutting through Vraxel shields. The landing zone became a killing field in seconds. The Vraxel troops tried to advance, following their training, moving in coordinated groups. But human soldiers didn't fight fair. They used hit-and-run tactics, striking from unexpected angles and disappearing before the Vraxel could respond. They used the city itself as a weapon, collapsing buildings onto enemy formations, flooding tunnels where Vraxel took cover. Yoonji moved between positions, coordinating the defense through hand signals and short radio bursts. She had studied human history, read about every guerrilla war ever fought. The Vraxel were learning those lessons now, paid in blood, back in space. Minho's team fought their way off the flagship and returned to their stealth ship. The mission was complete. The Vraxel commander was dead. But Minho knew this was just the first victory. The Vraxel Empire was vast, and they would send more ships, more soldiers. This battle was won, but the war had just begun. He was right. News of the defeat spread through Vraxel space like fire. For the first time ever, a Vraxel fleet had been beaten. The Empire reeled in shock. Their leaders gathered in emergency council, rage and disbelief warring in their minds. They would not accept this humiliation. The Second Armada was assembled within days. 1,500 warships, 3 times larger than the First Fleet. They pulled vessels from conquered systems, stripped garrisons, recalled every available ship. At the head of this armada stood War Master Kryloth, the most decorated Vraxel commander in history. He had never lost a battle in 40 years of service. While the Second Armada prepared, Ji-won worked on a different kind of warfare. Diplomatic Officer Soo-yoon, a woman with silver streaks in her hair and eyes that saw opportunity everywhere, had proposed a bold idea. The Vraxel controlled thousands of species. What if those species learned that the Invincible Empire could bleed? Soo-yoon made contact with resistance groups on occupied worlds, sending coded messages through channels the Vraxel didn't monitor. She told them what had happened at the Calith homeworld. She offered them something precious: hope and human tactical training. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of species reached out, desperate for a chance to fight back. So Yoon worked with Jiwon to create training materials, simple tactics that any species could use. Hit supply lines. Disrupt communications. Make the Vraxel pay for every inch of occupied territory. Resistance movements sprang up across Vraxel space. Nothing major at first, just small attacks that seemed like random violence. But they were coordinated, guided by human strategy. The Vraxel suddenly had to defend everywhere at once, spreading their forces thin dot in her laboratory. Yuna made a breakthrough that would change the war. She had been studying captured Vraxel technology for weeks, taking apart their computer systems piece by piece. She found it a universal vulnerability in how all Vraxel ships networked together. They used the same basic architecture across their entire fleet. Working with scientist Jisoo, a young woman whose specialty was computer viruses and malware, Yuna developed what they called the Perseus virus. It was elegant and deadly, designed to spread through Vraxel networks like wildfire. Once infected, a ship's systems would shut down at random intervals, just long enough to make the ship vulnerable. They tested it on captured Vraxel equipment. It worked perfectly. The virus spread from one system to another, impossible to stop once it started. Yuna smiled grimly. The Vraxel had built an empire on their technology. Now that technology would be their downfall. Commander Hyunwoo, the naval fleet operations leader, received the Perseus virus and understood its implications immediately. He was a career naval officer with 30 years of experience, and he knew how to use a weapon like this. He began planning the defense against the Second Armada, incorporating the virus into every strategy. When the Second Armada arrived at the edge of the Calith system, War Master Kryloth looked at the planet with cold confidence. He had studied the recordings of the first battle, analyzed every human tactic. He would not make the same mistakes. His fleet would overwhelm these creatures with sheer numbers and coordinated fire. There would be no chaos, no confusion, just absolute, crushing victory. He gave the order to advance. Hyunwoo watched the Vraxel fleet approach and felt his stomach tighten with fear. 1,500 ships. Even with everything they had learned, every trick they had prepared, the odds were terrible. But he had his orders, and he trusted Jiwon's plan. He sent the signal. The human and Calith fleet moved away from the planet, not engaging, just retreating into the asteroid field that ringed the system. War Master Kryloth sneered. They were running. Predictable. He ordered his ships to pursue and destroy them. The Vraxel fleet entered the asteroid field in perfect formation. Their sensors swept for enemies and found them scattered among the rocks, small groups of ships trying to hide. Kryloth ordered his ships to spread out and hunt them down methodically. That's when the trap closed. Thousands of mines, hidden in the asteroids, activated simultaneously. Explosions rippled through the Vraxel formation. Ships that dodged the mines ran into ambush positions where human and Calith vessels waited with weapons charged. The Perseus virus was loaded into missiles and fired at every Vraxel ship in range. Specialist Taiwan triggered the virus activation remotely. Across the Vraxel fleet, computer systems started failing. Navigation went dark. Weapons targeting froze. Shields flickered and died. Ships collided with each other as their guidance systems crashed. War Master Kryloth realized too late that he had led his fleet into a killing zone. These humans didn't fight like anyone he had ever faced. They turned every advantage into a disadvantage, every strength into a weakness. His perfect formation was now a liability. Ships too close together, unable to maneuver in the asteroid field. The battle became a nightmare. Wherever the Vraxel turned, enemies appeared. The virus spread from ship to ship through their networked systems, shutting down random vessels at the worst possible moments. Kryloth tried to restore order, to reorganize his forces, but the chaos was overwhelming. And across the galaxy, on 100 different worlds, enslaved species rose in rebellion. Coordinated by human strategy, they struck at the same time, targeting Vraxel supply depots, communication stations, and garrison posts. The Empire was fighting everywhere at once, and their predictable tactics were failing everywhere. The Invincible Empire was crumbling, and the humans had only just begun to fight. War Master Kryloth stood on his flagship bridge and watched his armada die. 300 ships gone in the first hour, 500 by the second. The Perseus virus had spread through his entire fleet, turning their own technology into an enemy that couldn't be fought. Ships went dark at random, their systems crashing, leaving them helpless targets for human weapons. He tried everything. He ordered ships to disconnect from the network, but the virus was already inside their individual systems. He commanded his forces to retreat and regroup, but there was nowhere to retreat to. The asteroid field had become a maze of death, every rock hiding enemies, every shadow concealing weapons. Minho led another boarding party, this time targeting Kryloth's flagship directly. They had done this before, and they would do it again. The Vraxel expected them this time, had prepared defenses, but it didn't matter. Human adaptability was the key. Every defense the Vraxel created, humans found a way around. They cut through the hull in a different location, moved through different corridors, used tactics they hadn't tried in the first boarding. The Vraxel security forces were ready for the last attack, but not for this one. Minho's team reached the bridge in half the time it took before. War Master Kryloth faced Minho personally, his forearms holding weapons, his pride refusing to let him flee. He was the greatest warrior in Vraxel history. He would not die running from these creatures. The fight lasted 11 seconds. Kryloth was skilled, but Minho had been training for combat since he was 16. More importantly, Minho fought to win, not to prove anything. When it was over, the War Master lay dead, and the Second Armada had lost another commander. This time, the effect was even more devastating. Without Kryloth's leadership, the remaining Vraxel ships panicked. Some tried to fight on. Others attempted to flee the system. Most simply stopped, their crews paralyzed by the impossibility of what was happening. The invincible Vraxel Empire had been beaten twice by the same enemy. Yemen's squadron hunted the fleeing ships without mercy. Not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. Every Vraxel ship that escaped would report back to the Empire, and more would come. They had to make this defeat so complete, so devastating, that the Vraxel would think twice before attacking again. By the time the battle ended, over 1,000 Vraxel ships were destroyed or disabled. The asteroid field was a graveyard of broken vessels. Only 200 ships managed to escape into faster-than-light travel. Running back to Vraxel space with news of the catastrophe. On the planet below, Yunji walked through the battlefield where Vraxel ground forces had tried to establish a foothold. The alien soldiers had fought bravely according to their training, but bravery wasn't enough against tactics they had never encountered. The humans in Calith had driven them back, captured hundreds, killed thousands more. She felt no joy in the victory. War was ugly no matter who you fought, but she had protected innocent people, had kept the Calith safe. That meant something. General Deho surveyed the aftermath of the battle and allowed himself a moment of relief. They had won. Against all odds, with inferior numbers and technology, they had defeated the Vraxel twice. But he knew the war wasn't over. The Vraxel Empire still existed, still controlled thousands of worlds. They would have to decide what came next. Across Vraxel space, the news arrived like a thunderclap. The Second Armada destroyed. War Master Kryloth dead. Another 1,500 ships lost. The scale of the defeat was beyond anything in Vraxel history. Their empire, built over 2 centuries of conquest, was shaken to its foundation. The Vraxel Emperor convened his council in the capital city of their homeworld. For the first time in living memory, they faced a crisis they couldn't solve with overwhelming force. Species across their empire were rebelling. Their fleets were suffering losses they couldn't replace quickly. And these humans, these impossible, unpredictable humans, had shown the entire galaxy that the Vraxel could be beaten. Arguments raged for days. Some council members demanded total war, the commitment of every ship and soldier to destroy the humans and make an example of them. Others pointed out that such an effort would leave their empire defenseless, would invite every conquered species to rise at once. A few, very quietly, suggested something unthinkable: negotiation. The emperor listened to them all. He was old, had ruled for 50 years, had seen the empire grow from strong to invincible. But he was also pragmatic. Pride was meaningless if it led to the empire's destruction. The humans had proven they couldn't be easily conquered. More importantly, they had shown other species how to fight back. If the war continued, the empire would tear itself apart from within. He made his decision. Su-Yun received the message 3 weeks after the battle. The Vraxel Empire was requesting peace negotiations. She read the message twice, hardly believing it. Then she called for Jiwan and General Deho. They had won not just battles, but the war itself. The negotiations took place on a neutral space station provided by the Caliph. Su-Yun led the human delegation, backed by military advisors and diplomats who had been trained for first contact scenarios but never imagined using those skills in an intergalactic peace conference. The Vraxel delegation arrived with ceremony and arrogance still clinging to them like old armor. But underneath, Su-Yun could see their fear. They were negotiating because they had no choice, and they knew it. She stated human demands clearly: immediate end to all conquests, full autonomy for every species under Vraxel control, dismantling of 75% of the Vraxel military to prevent future aggression, war reparations to the Caliph and other victim species, and permanent observation posts to ensure compliance. The Vraxel delegates protested, called the terms too harsh, demanded better conditions for their empire. So-Yun listened patiently, then showed them something. Videos from the rebellion still ongoing across Vraxel space. Reports of species preparing their own fleets to attack the Vraxel homeworld. Intelligence showing that the empire was one major defeat away from complete collapse. The Vraxel could accept these terms and survive as a reduced but stable power. Or they could refuse and watch their empire burn. Their choice. It took 3 days of negotiation, but they agreed. Every term, every demand. The treaty was signed by representatives of humanity, the Caliph, and a dozen other species who had suffered under Vraxel rule. The empire's expansion was over. On the Caliph homeworld, people celebrated in the streets. Their light pulsed with colors that meant joy, relief, hope for the future. Vareth found Jiwan in the command center, still working despite the victory. The Caliph pressed its finger to her forehead again. And this time, the images were of gratitude, friendship, and a bond that would last across the stars. The dimensional gateway finished recharging on schedule, 6 months after the humans had arrived. General Deho assembled everyone for the final decision. They could go home now. Back to Earth, back to their families, back to the lives they had left behind. But the galaxy had changed. The Caliph offered the humans a permanent alliance, a place among the stars as honored friends and defenders. Some humans wanted to return home immediately. Others saw opportunity in this new world. G1 chose to stay. She had found purpose here, had helped liberate an entire galaxy. Her strategic mind was needed to help rebuild, to establish new governments, To teach defensive tactics to species who had never known freedom, Minho stayed too. His team had become legends among the Caliph and other species. They were training the first multi-species special forces unit, teaching soldiers from a dozen different worlds how to fight smart, instead of just fighting hard. Yuna remained to continue her research. The combination of human and Caliph technology had opened doors she had never imagined. She was working on projects that would have been impossible on Earth, advancing science in ways that benefited everyone. About half of the original 50,000 humans chose to stay in the new galaxy. The rest went home through the gateway, carrying with them stories of adventure, war, and triumph among the stars. They brought back Caliph technology, alien knowledge, and proof that humanity was not alone in the universe. On Earth, the returning soldiers and scientists were debriefed for months. Their stories seemed impossible, but the evidence was undeniable. Alien technology, detailed maps of other star systems, recordings of battles in space. Earth had made first contact, fought its first interstellar war, and won. 5 years passed. Earth joined the galactic community as a full member, welcomed by the Caliph and dozens of other species. The Vraxel Empire transformed into a peaceful confederation of worlds, its warlike past slowly fading into history. Humans established embassies on 40 different planets, sharing knowledge and culture across the stars. G1 became the first human ambassador to the Galactic Council. She walked into the Great Assembly Hall, where representatives of 3,000 species gathered, and she remembered arriving on an alien world in fear and confusion. Now she stood among them as an equal, as a friend, as a hero who had changed the galaxy. Minho trained the next generation of defenders, teaching them that the key to victory wasn't just strength or technology, but the ability to adapt, to think differently, to never give up even when facing impossible odds. Yuna published her research across the galaxy. Her work on combined human Caliph technology advancing science for every species.